Hello, everybody. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Zia Modi for our WinPE Insights feature, the very first in a video format. Zia is the co-founder and managing partner at AZB and Partners and really doesn't need any introduction. She is one of the most trusted advisors for corporate India, an icon who has forged ahead and carved an immensely successful path for herself, and a leader who has widened that path for those that have followed. We are proud to have Zia as an advisor to WinPE. Hear from her as she talks to Shrija Vasantam.
Hi, Zia. Thank you once again for taking out time to speak to you WinPE Insights. I'll start with the first segment, all about business. What key things that changed in corporate India from when you started?
So I started a long time ago, and my age will give it away, but I've been now in practice for over 30, 35 years in India. And I think that probably if you ask me where the landscape has changed most significantly is where business leaders and top corporate houses have changed the way they evaluate risk. Earlier, it was a lot of dekha jayega, chalta hai, jaane do, you're being too conservative, to where the landscape is now, where they say, kuch hoga, kya kare, kaise kare. And so the shift into understanding that the risk now is real is one thing that I see is significantly altered. The other thing, of course, is the internationalization of a lot of our Indian MNCs, if you like. Whereas many decades ago or a couple of decades ago, they would really think domestic. Now the vision is the world. You see it in the Reliance Jio ambition and their plan. You see the Tatas who have gone globally, and you see Indians more interested in global opportunities than you would have seen before. So they have gained that confidence. I know that in recent years, because of the over-leveraging and the debt and other things may have weighed them down, but their mindset has now become much more global. So the deal flow that comes to their desk is not just domestic, but international.
You have seen many macro shocks and consequent disruptions in corporate India. What are the big shifts that you expect to see post this pandemic?
I think the first is, of course, where corporations will want to look at survival of the fittest and how to get their balance sheet in a better position during COVID and post-COVID. A lot of that has to do with the obvious things like efficiency, etc. But a lot of them are also thinking of what are the strategic opportunities that the pandemic offers them, both in terms of valuation, in terms of refinancing, in looking at restructuring, looking at partnering with private equity at the right valuation, and getting realistic about what plans have to be put in place such that they are in a better position, because frankly, no one's predicting when the economy will normalize. We only know the reality, which is that the global economy and the Indian economy has severely contracted. So I think that a lot of it is, so if you look at private equity, a lot of them are focused on their existing portfolio rather than just go into new deal flow. Do they need more money? Do they need more governance? Do they need more connects that the private equity can offer them to global supply chains, etc., etc.? And so it's more inward, but the smarter ones are also looking at what are these opportunities. And that is where I think a lot of the discussion is focused on.
Recent corporate battles have raised concerns about businesses controlled by families and their corporate governance. Could you please share your views on this?
So, I am a firm believer that promoter-led companies drive value, because I believe that the promoters have sufficient skin in the game to see that the health of their company enhances the value of their shareholding. What happens when there are battles, unfortunate fallouts, value diminution, at least short term, public relations that have to be put into play, most importantly, mind distraction from the positive energy that otherwise could flow for the growth of the corporation. But the truth is that there will be battles. and they will be fought. And the real issue is, how much can you avoid it? How much can you settle it into a workable set of negotiations? And how quickly can the separation or otherwise take place so you can move forward?
Zia, why do you think majority of the M&A activity in India is currently driven by FDI?
Because, the world still looks at India as a fabulous market. In which place will you have such a confluence of democracy and demography? And if you look at the spend of our youth and the traditional projections, absent COVID, of what the middle class and the young middle class is capable of, which MNC can ignore this market anymore? And therefore, I think that at different stages of their interest cycle, every MNC is mandated to look at India to see whether it works or doesn't work for them. And of course, there have been many, many success stories, which again drives the interest high. So I would say, consumer, pharma, logistics, warehousing, all these are obvious investment destinations for global M&A to come into India through FDI.
Could you please share with us what are some of the new practices that you're focusing on at AZB?
So nothing immediately new, but in the last couple of years, what we've seen a huge uptick is in white collar crime and forensic investigation. So we see huge flood of whistleblowers that now have to be taken seriously, both under SEBI rules and abroad. And once that comes, there is no way to ignore it. Whether it is a frivolous complaint or a rubbish complaint or a serious complaint, it has to be taken to its logical conclusion. And it doesn't stop at just an investigation. What is the outcome? How does that impact on the auditors? What does it do to the balance sheet? Does it raise issues about qualifications to the balance sheet? How will the stock market react to that? How will SEBI react to that? So that has been a large boom in that particular practice area for us. I think the other thing that we have seen is a lot of more control deals happening by private equity into listed companies. And so that has become also a practice that has grown much more significantly in the last 2-3 years than before. And that comes into play all the takeover regulations, the insider trading regulations, and it's very nuanced. And you can't afford to make a mistake because the consequences are severe. So I would say these two practice areas for AZB have been quite busy compared to the past.
You've advised on some of the biggest deals in India, Zia. Could you please share with us a favorite incident from your experience?
So, one of my favorite deals, not the biggest one now in hindsight, was the first international acquisition by Tata Steel of Nat Steel. It was many, many moons ago. And for me personally, it was my first major cross-border deal. And we had to deal with the sellers' factories in Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore, all over South Asia, and the cultural differences on how you negotiate, how you play out gives and takes was one of the most fascinating for me. And Indians don't like too much confrontation. And in our case, the seller was a South Asian group. They didn't like much confrontation. And so within all these non-confrontational conversations, the bottom line never got bottomed out. And so the lawyers had to do the unpopular job of saying, okay, so this is our position. And for me, it was very interesting to see how the counterparties reacted to what was obviously a different culture and a different way of negotiating. But I learned a lot in that transaction for two reasons. One is I learned along with Tata Steel, and in particular, the then CFO, who's now, of course, risen to greater heights, Kaushik Chatterjee, who basically was probably his first important cross-border M&A. And so learning along with your client is always great fun because you develop a special relationship both for him and the company. And I think that what we learned was how much we didn't know and how quickly we had to learn on the job because the other side was well prepared and the other side had its ducks lined up. and we had to extract the maximum value with the best terms. And so for me, that was one of my greatest learning experiences. And the other one, of course, not for me personally, but for the firm, was the recent Reliance Jio transaction, where we acted for Reliance in the largest FDI deal in India, 20 billion plus. It was led by two of my partners, Ashwath Rao and Nilanjana Singh. And it was a series of 14 investments, one after the other, by 13 investors, ruthless in the timeliness of its execution, and basically dealing with so many parallel streams of work at the same time, and yet having to deliver the excruciating correct result every time for Reliance.
Based on your experiences, Zia, what are some of the personal characteristics or traits that differentiate large deal makers from others?
I think the ability to look at the macro, the ability to stop fighting the small fights, the maturity to be able to give some firm and perhaps unpopular bits of advice to your client, the ability to read the other side due to your experience, and to see who is going to blink first, on what point and for what purpose. And then to really put all the deal points on the table and sort them out in terms of priority, where then you start your trading, as I call it. You trade your points. I think a larger firm has just more experience on how to separate the wheat from the chaff. Smaller firms who've done many deals may have that experience, but smaller firms normally don't get the opportunity as much as larger firms would do to land those deals. And so experience builds on experience, and that's simply how the effect takes place, so that when a new deal comes, you're already telling the client, don't bother with this, push on this, don't give up on this, we'll trade this. And that just comes from the deal flow that people have had in the past.
Now we move on to the fun segment, Ask Me Anything with Zia. You've accomplished so much in life. What keeps you ticking now?
I enjoy what I do, and therefore I do it. I think the passion is still high. And now, more than myself personally as a professional, the passion is to make sure that the firm just scales greater heights and the institutionalization of the firm gets done quickly.
What's your secret technique for staying on top of the ever-changing law landscape in India?
Good partners that keep me posted, and a lot of Google alerts that I read every night before I go to sleep.
What's the best mentorship advice you've received to date, and from whom?
Well, I had a wonderful mentor in New York called Norman Miller. And I think that what he taught me was that I didn't need to be diffident. Once I was confident that I had mastered a matter or an issue or a problem, that I should be able to defend it. And even if I was wrong, the respect that I would get from my seniors was the ability to defend it with the reasons that I gave. So that meant that you always had to be super prepared. If you were going to be challenged on your thought process, you needed to be very clear as to what all went into that thought process and what you didn't miss out. And so I learned the art of really diving deep, but also having to be practical. That's, I think, the best lesson that I got to learn from my mentor, Mr. Miller. And then I had a mentor called Obed Chinoy, who was my mentor when I came back to India and worked in court for many years. And he taught me again the virtue of being meticulous, the virtue of being always ready, and the virtue of always being completely honest to your conversations with the judge.
If you could go back and give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Work less.
What would you have pursued as a career if not law?
Many people have asked me that, but genuinely nothing interested me other than law. I hated science, so that whole field was out. I loved history, but I wasn't planning to be a professor or a historian. And so I think law just came naturally, and it stuck and it stayed and it worked out.
Outside your work and family, at this point, what matters to you the most?
Between work and family and my religion, nothing much matters. A little bit of travel, a little bit of downtime. But if I had more time, a little bit more reading, just virtually stopped. But really, family and work consume the day, even today, and a few prayers along the way.